The Alpha King's army stopped for a girl dragging a coffin alone in the snow. "Halt the vanguard!" Commander Uriah Flores roared, his breath pluming like dragon's fire in the freezing air. "My king, there is an obstruction on the pass." Alpha King Terrence. Cox spurred his massive midnight black warhorse forward, the ranks of 10,000 armored wolves parting in absolute, terrified silence. Through the blinding, swirling blizzard, Terrence narrowed his icy silver eyes. It wasn't a fallen tree or a rebel barricade. It was a girl. Fragile, freezing, and utterly alone, she was dragging a massive, rune-carved ironwood coffin through the knee-deep snow. The wind howled through the jagged peaks of the winter pass like a chorus of dying wolves, a relentless force that sought to strip the warmth from anything foolish enough to draw breath. Lottie Barnes did not feel her fingers anymore. She had long since stopped feeling her toes, the worn leather of her boots thoroughly compromised by the biting, unforgiving frost. All she knew was the agonizing friction of the thick hemp ropes biting into her blistered shoulders, and the monstrous dead weight of the ironwood coffin trailing behind her in the deep snow. Just a few more miles, she told herself, her voice nothing more than a cracked whisper lost instantly to the gale. Just keep moving. The coffin was an antique, heavy enough to require 3 strong men to lift, yet here she was, a girl barely in her 20s, hauling it across the most treacherous terrain in the Northern Territories. The wood was black as midnight, etched with ancient fading wards that pulsed with a faint, almost imperceptible warmth, the only thing that had kept her from freezing to death 3 nights ago. Her mind, fractured by exhaustion, drifted back to the moment the burden became hers. She saw the blood-soaked floorboards of the sanctuary. She saw Willard Peterson, the old village elder who had taken her in when she was nothing but a starving orphan, clutching a fatal wound to his chest. "They are coming, Lottie!" Willard had choked out, his weathered hands gripping her collar with surprising, desperate strength. "Virgil Watson, he will burn the North to ash to find what is inside. You cannot let him have it. Take it to the Southern Keep. Do not open it. Do not let anyone see it." "But Willard, what is it?" she had cried, tears streaming down her soot-stained face. "The only thing that can save us from the monsters," he had whispered, before his eyes rolled back, leaving Lottie with a debt she could never repay and a secret she did not understand. Now, as the snow blinded her, a new sound pierced the rhythmic howling of the wind. It was a low, rhythmic thudding that vibrated through the soles of her boots. It was not the erratic, chaotic scramble of Virgil Watson's rebel mercenaries. This sound was disciplined, rhythmic, terrifying. Lottie paused, her chest heaving as she wiped a mixture of snow and freezing sweat from her eyelashes. Slowly, the blizzard parted, revealing a sight that made her blood run colder than the ice beneath her feet. An army. It was a sea of black steel and crimson banners, stretching back as far as the eye could see, winding down the mountain pass like a massive armored serpent. At the forefront rode a line of colossal war horses, their breath pluming in the air. At their center sat a man who seemed to absorb the little light the winter sun offered, Alpha King Terrence Cox. Even in the lawless North, his name was spoken in hushed, terrified whispers. He was the conqueror of the East, the sovereign of the wolf clans, a man rumored to possess a heart made of the very iron he used to forge his empire. His armor was pitch black, accented with silver fur, and his eyes, piercing, luminous silver, locked directly onto her. Lottie's instincts screamed at her to run, to abandon the coffin and dive into the treacherous ravines where no heavy cavalry could follow. But she couldn't. Willard's dying face flashed in her mind. She tightened her grip on the ropes, squaring her aching shoulders. She stood her ground, a tiny, fragile speck of defiance against a tidal wave of military might. The army ground to a halt, with a deafening clatter of armor and stamped hooves. The silence that followed was heavier than the coffin. Commander Uriah Flores, a man whose face was a roadmap of brutal scars, spurred his horse a few paces forward. His hand rested casually on the pommel of a massive broadsword. "You there," Uriah barked, his voice laced with dangerous amusement. "Clear the king's road, girl, unless you wish to be ground into the permafrost." Lottie didn't move. She couldn't speak. Her throat was too dry, too cold. She just stared at the Alpha King, her chin tilted upward in silent, desperate rebellion. Terrence watched her, his expression an unreadable mask of stone. He noted the blood on her hands, the unnatural weight of the box she was pulling, and the fierce, unbroken fire in her hazel eyes. In all his years of conquest, armies had fled before him. Kings had dropped to their knees. Yet here was a half-starved girl standing squarely in the path of 10,000 soldiers, guarding a wooden box. "Commander?" Terrence's voice was remarkably quiet, yet it carried over the howling wind, resonating with an undeniable preternatural authority. "Bring her to the vanguard and bring her prize." "My king, we are already delayed," Uriah began to protest. Terrence shot his commander a single chilling look. Uriah snapped his jaw shut, bowing his head. As soldiers dismounted and approached her, Lottie finally found her voice, drawing a small, rusty hunting knife from her belt. "Touch it," she snarled, her voice shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline, "and I'll cut your hands off." The soldiers hesitated, looking back at their king. Terrence Cox's lips twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was a shift in the ice. He dismounted, his boots crunching heavily in the snow as he walked toward her, towering over her like a dark monolith. "Put the knife away, little bird," Terrence said softly, his silver eyes boring into hers. "Before you hurt yourself. You are walking with us now." The king's temporary encampment was erected with terrifying efficiency. Within an hour, a fortress of canvas and iron had sprung up in the shelter of a massive mountain overhang, shielding the core of the army from the worst of the blizzard. Lottie found herself shoved unceremoniously into the largest tent, a sprawling pavilion warmed by a roaring brazier. The sudden heat was agonizing to her frostbitten skin, making her extremities tingle with sharp burning pain. She stumbled, collapsing onto the thick fur rugs, her muscles finally giving out after days of relentless strain. The heavy canvas flap swept open, and Terrence Cox entered, followed closely by Commander Uriah Flores. Behind them slipped a woman Lottie hadn't seen outside. She was tall, lithe, and moved with the absolute silence of a hunting cat. This was Hattie Ross, the king's master of whispers and chief scout. Hattie leaned against the main tent pole, her sharp dark eyes assessing Lottie with a mixture of suspicion and grudging respect. "Let me kill her and be done with it, Terrence," Uriah growled, not bothering with formalities in private. "She's a northern scout, Virgil Watson's spy. It's an ambush tactic slowing us down in the pass." "If she is a spy," Hattie chimed in, her voice a smooth, melodic drawl, "she is a remarkably dedicated one. I checked her trail, Commander. She's been dragging that ironwood monstrosity for at least 50 miles, alone. No tracks flanking her, no hidden battalions." Terrence ignored them both. He walked over to the brazier, poured a cup of hot, spiced wine from an iron kettle, and walked over to Lottie. He knelt, an act that shocked both Uriah and Hattie, and held the cup out to her. "Drink," Terrence commanded softly. Lottie looked at the cup, then at him. Her hands shook violently as she reached out, her fingers brushing his leather-gloved hand. The wine burned her throat, but it sent a glorious wave of life back into her chest. She coughed, wrapping her frozen fingers around the warm metal cup. "Who are you?" Terrence asked, his voice a low, mesmerizing rumble. "And why are you hauling a corpse through my mountains?" "They aren't your mountains," Lottie snapped back, surprising herself with her own audacity. The wine was making her reckless. "And my name is Lottie Barnes. As for the coffin, it's none of your business." Uriah drew a dagger, taking a step forward. "Watch your tone, insolent wretch." Terrence held up a hand, stopping Uriah in his tracks without looking at him. "Lottie Barnes." He tasted the name on his tongue. "You are running from someone. The blood on your coat is not yours. It's fresh. 3 days old at most. You are heading south. The only thing south of here is my capital." He leaned in closer, his silver eyes catching the firelight. "What is in the box, Lottie?" "I don't know," Lottie lied, though technically it was the truth. She hadn't opened it. Hattie stepped forward, a wry smile playing on her lips. "She's lying, or half lying. The runes on that box are old magic, Your Grace, sealing magic. You don't put a dead body in a box like that unless you expect it to wake up." "Open it," Terrence ordered. "No!" Lottie lunged, not at the king, but toward the tent entrance where the coffin had been deposited just outside the flap. Terrence caught her easily, his massive hand wrapping around her upper arm. He wasn't hurting her, but his grip was like an iron vice. "You are in no position to deny me, Lottie," Terrence said, his face inches from hers. She could smell pine, leather, and the metallic tang of snow on him. "Virgil Watson has incited a rebellion that threatens to tear this continent apart. I am marching to crush him. If that box contains a weapon, a prisoner, or a plague, I will know." "If you open it," Lottie breathed, her eyes welling with tears of frustration. "The wards will break. Willard said the wards must hold." "Who is Willard?" Hattie asked sharply. "Willard Peterson," Lottie replied, defeated. Hattie and Uriah exchanged a dark look. Terrence's jaw clenched. Willard Peterson is dead, Terrence stated flatly. My spies reported his village was massacred by Virgil Watson's men a week ago. He is dead, Lottie whispered, the grief finally catching up to her. He died in my arms. He gave me the coffin. He told me to keep it from Virgil at all costs. Terrence released her arm, standing up slowly. The atmosphere in the tent had shifted. The unpredictable nature of the king was legendary. One moment a tyrant, the next a calculating scholar. If Virgil Watson wants it, Terrence mused, looking toward the tent flap, then it is valuable. Commander Flores. Sire, double the perimeter guard. We hold here for the night. The blizzard is worsening. Terrence looked back down at Lottie. You will stay in my tent, Lottie Barnes. If you try to run, you will freeze. If you try to steal the coffin, Uriah will kill you. Tomorrow, you will tell me everything about Willard Peterson, and then we will open the box. Lottie curled into a tight ball on the furs, her heart pounding. She was a prisoner of the Alpha King, trapped in the eye of a political storm she didn't understand, guarding a secret that might kill them all. Night descended over the winter pass like a suffocating blanket. The howling wind outside masked the sounds of the camp, creating an isolated, eerie silence within the king's pavilion. Lottie lay awake, staring at the glowing embers of the brazier. Terrence sat at a heavy oak table across the tent, studying parchment maps by the light of a single candle. He hadn't slept. He seemed to draw energy from the cold itself. You should sleep, Terrence said suddenly, not looking up from his maps. The march tomorrow will be brutal. I can't sleep with you planning how to dissect my only reason for living, Lottie retorted, sitting up and pulling a thick wolf fur blanket tighter around her shoulders. Terrence finally looked up, setting his quill down. There was a strange intensity in his gaze, a crack in the cold facade. You have loyalty, Lottie Barnes. It is a rare currency in this world. Virgil Watson's men fight for gold and fear. My men fight for glory and duty. But you are fighting for a ghost. Willard wasn't a ghost. He was the only father I ever knew, Lottie said softly. You kings and commanders, you move armies across maps and count casualties as numbers. Willard knew every name in our village, and Virgil slaughtered them all because of whatever is in that box. Before Terrence could respond, a strange, unnatural sound pierced the night. It wasn't the wind. It was a high-pitched harmonic hum, like a tuning fork vibrating against glass. Terrence was on his feet in an instant, his sword drawn with a terrifying, fluid grace. The warding stones, he hissed. They've been breached. Chaos erupted. Screams of men and the clashing of steel echoed from the outer perimeter. The flap of the tent was violently torn open, and a bloodied guard fell dead onto the rugs, a black-fletched arrow protruding from his neck. Assassins! Uriah's roar echoed from somewhere outside. Stay behind me, Terrence ordered, stepping over the dead guard and stepping out into the blinding snow. Lottie, driven by sheer adrenaline and the primal need to protect Willard's final wish, grabbed her rusty knife and followed him out. The camp was a nightmare of shadows and fire. Tents were burning, illuminating the falling snow with a hellish orange glow. Men clad in white furs, Virgil Watson's elite ghost warriors, were swarming the camp, moving with unnatural speed. But Lottie's eyes darted immediately to the ironwood coffin. It was sitting where the guards had left it, but 3 ghost warriors were already hacking at the ropes, trying to hook it to a sled. No! Lottie screamed, sprinting across the snow. A warrior turned, raising a wicked curved blade to strike the girl down. Before the blade could fall, a blur of dark leather and steel intercepted him. Hattie Ross appeared seemingly out of thin air, twin daggers flashing in the firelight as she dispatched the warrior with ruthless efficiency. Get back, you idiot! Hattie yelled at Lottie, parrying a blow from another attacker. Terrence was a force of nature. He fought not like a man, but like the wolf his clan was named after. His broadsword cleaved through armor and bone, his movements a deadly dance of absolute precision. He was fighting his way toward Lottie, carving a path through the assassins. Suddenly, Lottie saw her, standing atop a snowbank, watching the chaos with a serene, terrifying smile, was Myrtle Henderson. Myrtle was the wife of a southern duke, ostensibly a hostage guest traveling with the king to ensure her husband's loyalty. But as Myrtle raised her hands, purple dark magic sparking between her fingertips, Lottie realized the horrifying truth. Myrtle was the traitor. She was Virgil Watson's inside agent, the one who had dropped the camp's magical defenses. Myrtle leveled her hands at Terrence's exposed back as he fought off 3 men. A lance of crackling dark energy formed in her palms. Terrence! Lottie shrieked, abandoning all reason. She threw herself forward, tackling the Alpha King just as Myrtle unleashed the spell. The dark magic missed Terrence by inches, slamming violently into the ironwood coffin instead. There was a sound like a thunderclap. A shockwave of pure, blinding white light erupted from the box, throwing Lottie, Terrence, Hattie, and the assassins off their feet. The blast extinguished the burning tents and silenced the wind. Lottie hit the snow hard, her vision spinning. She groaned, tasting copper. As the snow settled, a terrifying silence fell over the camp. The assassins, realizing their element of surprise was gone and the prize was damaged, began to retreat into the shadows under Myrtle's signaled command. Lottie pushed herself up onto her knees, her breath catching in her throat. The ironwood coffin was shattered. The ancient wood had splintered into 1,000 pieces, the glowing runes fading into dead ash. "No," Lottie sobbed, crawling toward the wreckage. "No, no, no." Terrence stood, wiping a streak of blood from his cheek, his silver eyes wide with shock. He walked slowly toward the ruins of the box, his sword lowered. There, lying in the snow amidst the splintered wood, was not a weapon. It was not a dead body. It was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. She was dressed in a simple homespun white dress, her pale skin glowing with a faint ethereal light. Her hair was a shock of silver, identical to the color of Terrence's eyes, and as Lottie crawled closer, she saw the child's chest rise and fall in a slow, rhythmic slumber. "Nettie," Lottie whispered, her voice cracking. Terrence stared at the child, the fearsome Alpha King rendered completely speechless. Uriah Flores, covered in the blood of his enemies, stomped over, his jaw dropping. "A child?" Uriah demanded, looking from the ruined box to Lottie. "You dragged a child through the winter pass in a cursed box?" "Itokur." It was a stasis rune, Hattie breathed, stepping forward, her usual cynical demeanor replaced by profound awe. She knelt in the snow beside the girl. It put her in a suspended sleep, protecting her from the cold and hiding her life force from magical trackers. "Willard Peterson didn't give you a corpse, Lottie. He gave you the future." Terrence slowly sheathed his sword, the metallic ring loud in the quiet aftermath of the battle. "Who is she, Lottie?" Lottie scooped the freezing child into her arms, wrapping her own tattered coat around the girl. Nettie felt unnaturally cold, but her heartbeat was steady. "She is Willard's granddaughter," Lottie explained, tears freezing on her cheeks. "But that's not why Virgil wants her. She's a true seer. The first one born in a century. She can see the threads of fate. Virgil wants to use her to predict his enemy's movements. He wants to use her to win the war." Terrence's expression hardened, a complex storm of emotions brewing in his silver eyes. He had spent his life surrounded by warlords, assassins, and politicians who dealt in lies and bloodshed. He had looked at Lottie and seen another player in the game. He hadn't realized she was playing an entirely different game altogether. She was just trying to protect an innocent. "Myrtle Henderson," Terrence said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming something lethal and terrifying. "She was the traitor. She brought the wards down. She escaped in the chaos," Uriah growled, his face twisted in shame. "My king. I failed to secure the perimeter." "You did not fail, Uriah. We were betrayed from within. A mistake I will rectify personally," Terrence said. He turned his attention back to Lottie, who was shivering violently, clutching the sleeping child to her chest. Without a word, Terrence stepped forward. He unclasped his own massive fur-lined black cloak, the mantle of the Alpha King, and swept it around Lottie and the child, enveloping them both in his immense warmth. The scent of him, strong and protective, surrounded Lottie. "You saved my life," Terrence said quietly, his gaze locking with hers. The ice in his eyes had melted, replaced by a burning, intense fire. "You threw yourself in front of a warlock's spell to save a man who threatened to kill you." "You were standing in the way," Lottie deflected weakly, her cheeks flushing warm beneath the dirt and frost. Terrence's hand gently brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, his thumb grazing her bruised cheekbone. The touch was agonizingly tender from a man known for his brutality. "No one has ever fought for me without expecting a crown or a coin in return. You are a remarkably unpredictable creature, Lottie Barnes." "What do we do now?" Lottie asked, her voice trembling, deeply affected by his proximity. "Now," Terrence announced, turning back to his men, his voice carrying the full roaring authority of the Alpha King, "we do not march south. Virgil Watson wants this child. He will bring his entire rebel army to these mountains to get her. We will not run. We fortify this pass. We make our stand here, and we bury Virgil Watson in the snow." A roar of approval erupted from the surviving soldiers. Hattie caught Uriah's eye across the camp. The grizzled commander was looking at the king with renewed fanaticism. Hattie smirked, spinning a dagger in her hand. "Looks like we're fighting a war for a little girl and a stubborn stray," she muttered to Uriah. "I've fought for worse reasons," Uriah grunted, though a small, grim smile touched his scarred lips. As Terence escorted Lottie and Nettie back into the repaired pavilion, Lottie realized something profound. She was no longer dragging a coffin alone in the snow. She was walking beside a king, and for the first time in her life, she felt entirely safe. The next 48 hours were a blur of desperate preparation. The Winter Pass, usually a death trap, became a fortified choke point. Terrence's engineers built ice walls and spiked trenches, turning the mountain's geography against the impending attack. Inside the king's tent, a different kind of tension brewed. Nettie had awakened. The little girl sat cross-legged on the furs, eating a bowl of hot stew. She possessed an eerie calm, her large, luminous eyes tracking things in the air that no one else could see. She had looked at Terence once, tilted her head, and said, "You have a shadow of a crown, but a heart of a wolf. The wolf must bleed for the snow to melt." Terence had only nodded solemnly. Lottie, however, found herself constantly hovering near him. The dynamic between them had shifted from captive and captor to something unspoken, heavy with electric anticipation. Catching each other's gazes across the war table, lingering touches when exchanging maps. It was a slow-burning fire in the freezing cold. But not everyone was content. "It's a suicide mission," Uriah muttered to Hattie as they inspected the southern perimeter. "Virgil's bringing 40,000 men. We have 10, and we are trapped in a gorge. We should have taken the girl and rode hard for the capital. Terence is risking the entire kingdom for a peasant girl he met 2 days ago." Hattie leaned against an ice wall, her dark eyes sharp. "Are you questioning the Alpha, Commander?" "I am a pragmatist, Hattie," Uriah shot back. "If Terence falls, the Empire fractures. Sometimes I wonder if I shouldn't take the vanguard and force a retreat myself, for the good of the realm." Hattie pushed off the wall, stepping into Uriah's space, her twin daggers suddenly very close to his ribs. "Listen to me, you scarred old bear," she hissed, her voice devoid of its usual mockery. "I've served 3 kings. Terence is the only one who actually gives a damn about the people he rules. If you betray him now, if you try to take command, I will slit your throat before you can draw that massive sword of yours. We stand with him, understand?" Uriah looked down at the deadly beautiful woman, surprised by her fierce loyalty. Slowly, a genuine grin broke across his face. "I was just testing the wind, Hattie. I'd follow him to hell. I just wanted to make sure you would too." Before Hattie could respond, a horn blew from the northern ridge, a deep, mournful wail that echoed through the pass. "They're here," Uriah roared, sprinting toward the front lines. The battle began not with a clash of steel, but with a roar of the mountain itself. Myrtle Henderson, standing atop a distant cliff flanked by Virgil Watson's heavy infantry, raised her staff. She chanted in a forgotten tongue, her voice amplified by dark magic. The snow on the peaks above the king's army began to shudder. "Avalanche!" the cry went up. A tidal wave of white death cascaded down the mountain walls, threatening to bury the vanguard alive. Terence reacted instantly. "Shield wall! Arch the lines!" he bellowed. But it wouldn't be enough. Lottie, standing near the command tent with Nettie, watched in horror as the snow roared downward. Suddenly, Nettie grabbed Lottie's hand. The child's eyes glowed a blinding silver. "Sing to the earth, Lottie," Nettie whispered. "You have the blood of the old wolves in you. Willard knew. Sing." Lottie didn't understand, but as she looked at Terence, who was bracing to be crushed by the snow, something ancient and primal snapped awake inside her. A deep, resonant heat bloomed in her chest. She didn't sing, she screamed. It was a sound that tore from her throat, part human, part animal, an alpha's call that she didn't know she possessed. The sound wave hit the falling avalanche. Impossibly, the wall of snow hit an invisible barrier of kinetic force just above the army, splitting down the middle and crashing harmlessly against the sides of the gorge, burying Virgil's advancing vanguard instead of Terence's. Terence turned, staring at Lottie with absolute shock, his chest heaving. Lottie collapsed to her knees, gasping for air, the dormant magic within her instantly draining her strength. "Charge!" Terence roared, seeing the opening. He drew his broadsword, his eyes locked on the banner of Virgil Watson. "Leave none alive." The clash was apocalyptic. Uriah and Hattie fought back to back, a whirlwind of brute force and lethal grace. But Virgil Watson was no coward. Clad in golden armor, wielding a massive halberd, he met Terence in the center of the carnage. "You die today, boy king!" Virgil sneered, swinging the halberd in a deadly arc. "And I will take the seer to rebuild the world." Terence ducked the blow, bringing his sword up in a vicious counterstrike. "You will rebuild nothing, traitor. Your world ends here." The two leaders clashed, steel ringing against steel. But Virgil was bolstered by Myrtle's dark magic, his strikes unnaturally heavy. He landed a devastating kick to Terence's chest, sending the king stumbling backward. Virgil raised his halberd for the killing blow. Lottie, watching from the ridge, screamed Terence's name. She grabbed a fallen soldier's bow, her hands shaking, knocking an arrow. She had never fired a weapon in war. She closed her eyes, remembering Willard's steady hands. She let the arrow fly. It didn't hit Virgil. It soared over the battlefield and plunged directly into the glowing crystal at the top of Myrtle Henderson's staff on the cliffside. The crystal shattered. The magical feedback was instantaneous. Myrtle screamed as the dark energy violently imploded, engulfing her and throwing her off the cliff. With the magic gone, Virgil staggered, suddenly feeling the weight of his armor and his years. Terence did not hesitate. He lunged forward, sweeping his broadsword in a flawless, brutal arc. Virgil Watson fell, his golden armor stained red in the snow. The rebel army, seeing their leader fall and their sorceress destroyed, broke rank and fled back into the freezing wilderness. The battle was over. The pass belonged to the Alpha King. The silence that followed the battle was profound, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the crunch of boots on the blood-stained snow. Terence stood over Virgil's body, his chest heaving, his sword dripping. He looked exhausted, battered, and entirely victorious. Slowly, he turned and looked up the ridge. Lottie was sliding down the icy slope, her boots slipping, rushing toward him. She didn't care about decorum or the hundreds of soldiers watching. She threw herself into his arms. Terence dropped his sword, his massive arms wrapping around her, lifting her off her feet. He buried his face in her neck, breathing in the scent of her, grounding himself in the reality that they had survived. "You foolish, unpredictable girl," Terence murmured against her skin, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved me. Again." "We saved each other," Lottie whispered, pulling back to look into his silver eyes. She reached up, gently wiping the blood from his jaw. "You didn't have to stay and fight for us." "I did," Terence said, his gaze intensely focused on her lips, "because a king without a heart is just a tyrant, and you brought my heart back to life." He leaned in, the harsh cold of the world fading away as his lips met hers. It was a desperate, hungry kiss, tasting of adrenaline, snow, and undeniable, overwhelming relief. Lottie kissed him back with everything she had, the heavy burden she had carried for so long, finally melting away in the heat of his embrace. When they finally parted, cheers erupted from the exhausted army. Uriah Flores walked up, leaning heavily on his sword, grinning through a bloody lip. Hattie stood beside him, her arm casually draped over the commander's shoulder, looking entirely too smug. "Well," Uriah grunted, "I suppose this means we have a new queen to deal with." Terence looked at Lottie, a rare, genuine smile illuminating his rugged face. "It seems we do." Nettie walked down the path, her small feet barely leaving prints in the snow. She walked up to Terence and took his massive armored hand in her tiny one. She looked up at the sky. The thick gray clouds that had blanketed the northern territories for months were finally breaking. A single brilliant ray of golden sunlight pierced the gloom, striking the bloodied snow and turning it to diamonds. "The wolf bled," Nettie said softly, her eyes clear and bright. "And the snow is melting. The winter is over." Lottie looked at Terence, her hand finding his. She had started this journey dragging a coffin, expecting only death and despair. Instead, she had found an army, a family, and a king who would move mountains for her. As the warmth of the sun finally touched her face, Lottie knew that Willard Peterson's final wish had been fulfilled. The future was safe. And so, the ruthless Alpha King found his greatest strength not in the might of his army, but in the unwavering resilience of a girl dragging the weight of the world through the snow. This cinematic tale reminds us that appearances are deceiving. Our heaviest, darkest burdens, our coffins, often contain the very seeds of our future salvation if only we have the courage to keep pulling them through the storm. In real life, we all navigate our own personal blizzards. We carry past traumas, overwhelming responsibilities, or hidden fears. But if we remain fiercely loyal to our purpose, like Lottie, we might just collide with the exact forces meant to help us heal and conquer our seemingly impossible battles. Don't abandon your journey, no matter how cold it gets. If this story of unpredictable loyalty, breathless suspense, and epic romance moved you, please hit that like button, share it with fellow fantasy lovers, and subscribe to my channel for more emotionally rich adventures. What coffin are you dragging today, and who is helping you pull it? Let me know in the comments below.